I moved into the apartment at the end of July. The summer heat was oppressive, the kind that clung to your skin no matter how many times you showered. The apartment wasn't much. A two-bedroom in an older building with creaky floors and thin walls. But it was affordable, close to work, and available immediately. Most importantly, it came with a roommate, Alex, who seemed pleasant enough when we met during the initial tour. Alex was in his late 20s, a quiet and somewhat reserved guy with an unassuming demeanor. He worked as a freelance graphic designer and spent most of his time in his room, headphones on, focused on his laptop. When we first met, he offered a brief smile and a handshake that was neither firm nor limp, just neutral. He mentioned that he'd been living in the apartment for about 3 years and that he didn't mind having someone else around to help split the bills. I was sold. The first few weeks were uneventful. We lived in that awkward cohabitation zone where neither of us really talked much, aside from the occasional, "How was work?" or "Do you want me to pick up anything from the store?" I worked long hours at a marketing agency, so I was often too tired to care. Alex, true to his word, stayed out of my way. But then, things started to feel off. It began with small, almost imperceptible changes. My toothbrush was moved from one side of the sink to the other. A glass I hadn't used would be sitting in the drying rack. The box of cereal I swore I just bought was nearly empty. At first, I chalked it up to my own forgetfulness. I'd always been scatterbrained, and starting a new job in a new city was enough to throw anyone off. But the unease lingered. One night, I came home late after a grueling day at work. I walked into the kitchen to grab a drink and noticed Alex's door slightly ajar. Normally, he kept it closed. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw movement inside. "Hey, Alex," I called out, my voice hesitant. No response. I stepped closer, peering into the dimly lit room. Alex was sitting at his desk, his back to me, staring intently at his computer screen. He was so still that, for a moment, I wondered if he'd fallen asleep upright. But then his head turned ever so slightly, just enough for me to see the edge of his face. His eyes, wide and unblinking, were locked on mine through the reflection of his monitor. "Oh, sorry," I mumbled, stepping back. "Didn't mean to bother you." He didn't say anything, just turned back to his screen. I quickly retreated to my room, heart pounding. Something about that look unsettled me, but I convinced myself it was just exhaustion playing tricks on me. The next morning, Alex was his usual self. He nodded at me over his coffee, mumbling a quick morning before retreating back into his room. I tried to shake off the weirdness from the night before, but the feeling lingered. Over the next few weeks, the oddities escalated. My clothes, neatly folded in my dresser, would sometimes be out of place. The door to my room, which I always locked when I left, would occasionally be unlocked when I returned. One evening, I found a long, deep scratch running down the side of my laptop, as if someone had taken a knife to it. When I confronted Alex, he gave me a puzzled look. "Why would I mess with your stuff?" he asked, his tone even. "Maybe you did it by accident?" I didn't believe him, but I had no proof. Still, I started to take precautions. I bought a small security camera and hid it on a shelf in my room, angled to capture the doorway. I didn't tell Alex. If he was messing with me, I wanted to catch him in the act. For a few days, everything was quiet. I checked the camera footage every evening, but there was nothing unusual. I began to wonder if I was just being paranoid. Then, one night, the camera caught something. It was around 2 a.m. The footage showed my door slowly creaking open. Alex stepped inside, his face partially obscured by the shadows. He stood there for several minutes, staring at my bed. I was asleep, completely unaware. Then he moved to my desk, opened a drawer, and rifled through it. He picked up a pair of scissors, held them up to the light, and just stood there, staring at them. After a moment, he put them back, closed the drawer, and left the room, shutting the door behind him. I watched the footage 3 times, my stomach twisting into knots. The way he moved, slow, deliberate, like he had all the time in the world. And the way he looked at those scissors. I didn't sleep that night. The next day, I called a locksmith and had the lock on my door changed. I didn't tell Alex. I didn't confront him. I wanted to, but the thought of him knowing I was onto him made my skin crawl. Instead, I started making plans to move out, but things only got worse. A week later, I woke up to find a note slipped under my door. It read, in neat, blocky handwriting, "Why did you change the lock?" I froze, the note trembling in my hands. How did he know? I hadn't told anyone. My mind raced with possibilities. Had he tried to get in and found the door locked? Had he been watching me somehow? That night, I barricaded my door with a chair under the handle. I kept a knife under my pillow. I didn't care if it was overkill. I wasn't taking any chances. But around 3 a.m., I woke up to the sound of the chair scraping against the floor. Someone was trying to open the door. "Alex!" I called out, my voice shaking. The scraping stopped. Silence. Then a soft knock. "Let me in," he said, his voice eerily calm. "Go away," I yelled, clutching the knife tighter. There was a pause. Then he laughed. It wasn't a normal laugh. It was low, guttural, and completely devoid of humor. I stayed awake until morning, every creak and groan of the apartment setting my nerves on edge. The next day, I went to the police. I showed them the footage from the camera and explained everything. They took my statement and promised to look into it, but they didn't seem overly concerned. "We'll talk to him," one officer said. That evening, I came home to find Alex sitting on the couch, staring at the wall. He didn't say anything as I walked past him, but I could feel his eyes on me. The police must have visited while I was at work, I thought. Maybe that would scare him off. Didn't. That night, I woke up to the sound of my window sliding open. My room was on the second floor. My heart stopped as I saw Alex climbing in, a knife glinting in his hand. I screamed and lunged for the door, throwing it open and running into the hallway. He chased after me, his footsteps thunderous behind me. I bolted for the front door, flinging it open and racing out into the street. A neighbor heard the commotion and called the police. Alex was arrested on the spot. During the investigation, they found dozens of notebooks in his room, filled with detailed accounts of my daily routines. He'd been watching me from the moment I moved in. The police also found knives, ropes, and other items that made it clear he'd been planning something far worse than scaring me. Alex was charged with stalking and attempted assault. I moved out of the apartment the next day, leaving behind anything that reminded me of that place. It took months for the nightmares to fade, and even now, I triple-check every lock before going to bed. I still think about that night, about how close I came to becoming another unsolved case. I'll never forget the way Alex looked at me through the reflection of his screen, or the sound of his laughter outside my door. But most of all, I'll never forget the lesson I learned. You never truly know the people you live with. I moved into the apartment at the end of July, desperate for a change of scenery. The move was a leap of faith, my first step into independence. The apartment wasn't anything fancy, just a two-bedroom in an aging building with creaky wooden floors and a faint smell of mildew in the hallways. But it was within my budget, close to my new job, and, most importantly, available immediately. My new roommate, Ethan, greeted me with a firm handshake and a wide smile when I arrived for the tour. Ethan was in his early 30s, with a clean-cut appearance and a voice that radiated warmth. He explained that he worked as a software engineer remotely and spent most of his time coding in his room. "I've had a few roommates come and go, but I'm hoping for someone who'll stick around a while," he said, laughing lightly. I figured he was just a regular guy looking to split the rent, and I was eager to settle in. The first few weeks were uneventful, almost comforting. Ethan and I coexisted in that polite, distant way roommates often do. We exchanged pleasantries in the kitchen and occasionally shared a cup of coffee. He cooked elaborate meals for himself, the aroma of spices and roasted vegetables wafting through the apartment. I was so caught up with my new job that I barely noticed anything odd. But looking back, there were signs. At first, it was the small things. A spoon left in the sink when I was sure I'd washed all the dishes. My favorite mug disappearing and then reappearing in a different cabinet. The thermostat set lower than I'd left it. I dismissed it all as minor inconveniences, the kind of thing that happens when you share a space. But then one evening, I came home to find my bedroom door slightly ajar. I always kept it shut when I left for work. Always. "Hey, Ethan," I called out, trying to sound casual. He appeared in the doorway of his room, his glasses perched on his nose and a book in hand. "Did you go into my room today? I think I might have left the door open, but I just wanted to check." He tilted his head, giving me a curious look. "No, I didn't." "Why? Is something missing?" "No, nothing's missing. It's probably just me being forgetful." I forced a smile and retreated to my room, but unease settled in the pit of my stomach. The feeling only grew stronger when I started noticing more oddities. The faint smell of my shampoo lingering in the air when I hadn't showered. The unmistakable sound of footsteps outside my door late at night. And once, while scrolling through my laptop, I found a folder I didn't recognize labeled temp files. Contained nothing but blank documents, but I hadn't created it. My heart raced as I deleted it, chalking it up to a system glitch. Then came the night I woke up to the faint sound of something moving outside my window. My bedroom was on the 3rd floor, so the thought of someone being out there was absurd. But the sound continued, a soft scraping, like fingers running along the glass. I bolted upright and turned on the light. The sound stopped. I pulled back the curtain, heart hammering in my chest, and saw nothing but darkness. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that someone had been there. The next morning, Ethan greeted me with his usual friendly demeanor, asking how my day was shaping up as he brewed a pot of coffee. His smile was warm, his tone genuine, but something about his presence felt off now. I couldn't explain it, but I started to avoid him as much as possible. One night, as I sat in my room scrolling through emails, I heard a soft knock on my door. "Yeah," I called out, hesitating. Ethan's voice came from the other side. "Hey, just wanted to let you know I'll be running some maintenance on the router. You might lose internet for a bit." "Okay, thanks for letting me know," I replied, though the explanation felt strange. "Maintenance? At 11 p.m.? I waited, listening closely. There were no sounds of tools or movement, just the faint creak of the hallway floorboards. My hand instinctively moved to lock my door. The following day, I decided to install a small security camera in my room. I placed it on the bookshelf, angled to capture the entire space, including the door. I told myself it was just to ease my mind. I reviewed the footage every evening, but for days there was nothing unusual. Then, about a week later, I saw him. Ethan entered my room in the middle of the night. The footage showed my door opening slowly, Ethan stepping inside with measured movements. He looked around, his eyes scanning my desk, my bed, and finally the bookshelf. He approached the shelf, stared directly into the camera, and smiled. Then he walked out, closing the door behind him. I stared at the footage in disbelief. How had he known about the camera? And why was he smiling like that? My heart raced as I replayed the clip over and over, each viewing sending chills down my spine. I knew I had to get out, but I didn't want to tip him off. I started packing my belongings gradually, taking a few things to my car each day after work. I told Ethan I was working late more often, trying to avoid being home, but it seemed like he knew. One night, I returned to find a note taped to my bedroom door. "You can't leave." The handwriting was neat, precise. My hands trembled as I ripped the note off the door and locked myself inside. I called the police that night, explaining everything, the footage, the note, the feeling that I was being watched. They took my statement and promised to investigate. But when they spoke to Ethan the next day, he must have charmed them, because they left without taking him in. That night, I barely slept. Around 2 a.m., I heard the faint sound of my door handle jiggling. Then, the sound of a key sliding into the lock. My blood ran cold. I had changed the lock myself. Ethan shouldn't have had a key. The door didn't budge, thanks to the chair I'd wedged under the handle, but the sound of him trying to get in didn't stop. For several agonizing minutes. Finally, I heard him walk away. The next morning, I decided I couldn't wait any longer. I packed everything I could fit into my car and drove to a friend's place. From there, I called my landlord. explaining the situation and requesting to break my lease. He agreed after I showed him the footage, and I filed a restraining order against Ethan. A few weeks later, I received a call from the police. They'd searched the apartment after I left and found a hidden camera in the bathroom, as well as notebooks detailing my daily schedule and habits. Ethan was arrested and charged with multiple counts of stalking and invasion of privacy. I never went back to the apartment. Even now, months later, I double-check every lock and flinch at unexpected sounds. Ethan's smile haunts my nightmares, a reminder of how close I came to danger. I'll never forget the lesson I learned. Trust is earned, not given, and some people wear normalcy like a mask to hide the darkness beneath. I moved into the apartment at the beginning of September, eager to start fresh after a messy breakup and a chaotic year. The place wasn't much to look at. A modest one-bedroom split into two, with walls thin enough to hear the neighbors arguing about their cat's diet. It had charm, though, large windows that let in plenty of sunlight and a small balcony overlooking a quiet street lined with maple trees. What sealed the deal was the rent, cheap enough to fit into my tight budget. My new roommate, Lucas, seemed like a decent guy when I met him. He was in his late 20s, tall and wiry, with a mop of dark hair and an easygoing demeanor. Lucas worked as a freelance photographer, he told me during my tour. "I'm out most of the day," he said, gesturing around the cozy living room. "So you'll have the place to yourself a lot." Sound good. Sounded perfect. I moved in the following week. For the first month, living with Lucas was almost too easy. He kept to himself and we rarely bumped into each other. When we did, he was always polite, offering a quick smile or a casual comment about the weather. His room was at the far end of the apartment, while mine was closer to the kitchen, so I hardly heard him unless he was playing music. He had good taste, classic rock, and the occasional jazz album. I started to think I'd lucked out with the perfect roommate, but little things started to nag at me. One day, I found my favorite coffee mug in Lucas's room when I was passing by with laundry. It wasn't a big deal, but I didn't remember lending it to him. Another time, the book I'd left on the coffee table was on the kitchen counter the next morning, open to a page I hadn't read yet. I figured Lucas might have been cleaning or rearranging things, but I didn't ask. Then there were the noises. Late at night, I'd hear faint creaks and muffled footsteps in the hallway. At first, I assumed it was Lucas moving around, but the sounds would come when I was sure he wasn't home. Once, I thought I heard whispering. I laughed it off, blaming my overactive imagination and the horror podcasts I listened to while working. The first real red flag came about 6 weeks in. I'd just gotten home from work, tired and hungry, when I noticed my bedroom door was open. I always kept it closed, and I was sure I'd shut it that morning. I hesitated before stepping inside, half expecting to find Lucas there, but the room was empty. Nothing seemed out of place, but the feeling of being watched prickled at the back of my neck. "Hey, Lucas," I called out, trying to keep my voice light. He appeared in the hallway, camera slung over his shoulder and a look of mild curiosity on his face. "Did you, go into my room today?" "No," he said, frowning slightly. "Why? Is something missing?" "No, it's fine. Probably just forgot to close the door," I mumbled, retreating quickly. Lucas didn't press the issue, but I caught him watching me for a moment before heading out. That night, I installed a cheap door lock I'd bought online. It gave me some peace of mind, but not enough. Over the next few days, I started noticing more strange things. A faint smell of cologne in my room that wasn't mine, small items slightly out of place, the distinct feeling that someone had been there. One morning, I found a small scratch on my desk, like someone had dragged something sharp across it. I decided to install a hidden camera in my room. It was a tiny device easily concealed on the bookshelf with a motion detector that sent recordings to my phone. I told myself it was just to ease my paranoia, that Lucas was harmless. But deep down, I was scared. For the first few nights, the footage showed nothing unusual. Lucas didn't enter my room, and the apartment was quiet. But on the fourth night, My phone buzzed with an alert at 2:43 a.m. My stomach churned as I opened the app and watched the live feed. Lucas was in my room. He moved slowly, deliberately, looking around with an almost clinical detachment. He opened my closet, ran his fingers along the hangers, and paused at my desk. Then he turned, staring directly at the camera. His lips curled into a smile, and he reached out to cover the lens. I barely slept that night. The next morning, I confronted him, my hands shaking as I held up my phone with the footage. "What the hell is this, Lucas?" He didn't deny it. Instead, he tilted his head, his expression calm but unnervingly blank. "I was just curious," he said. "You've been acting strange lately. I wanted to make sure you were okay." "That's not okay," I snapped, my voice rising. "Stay out of my room, or I'm calling the police." Lucas nodded, his demeanor eerily composed. "Of course, I didn't mean to upset you. I didn't trust him." I packed a bag that afternoon and stayed at a friend's place for a few days. When I returned to grab more of my belongings, the apartment felt different. Colder, darker, like the walls were closing in. Lucas wasn't home, but I found a note taped to my bedroom door. "You can't hide forever." The handwriting was neat, almost artistic. My heart pounded as I tore the note down and locked myself in my room. I called the police, but without physical evidence of a crime, there wasn't much they could do. They advised me to stay somewhere else if I felt unsafe. That night, I barricaded my door with a chair and kept a kitchen knife under my pillow. Around 3 a.m., I woke to the sound of the doorknob rattling. Then came the unmistakable sound of a key turning in the lock. My makeshift barricade held, but the handle jiggled for several agonizing minutes before the noise stopped. I moved out the next day, breaking my lease and leaving half my stuff behind. I stayed with friends until I could find another place. A few weeks later, I got a call from the landlord. Lucas had disappeared, leaving behind an apartment filled with photographs, hundreds of them. Most were of me, taken through windows, from the hallway, and even inside the apartment. The landlord handed the evidence over to the police, but as far as I know, Lucas was never found. Even now, I lock every door and window obsessively, always checking twice. I avoid renting with roommates, and I keep my curtains closed at night. Lucas's smile haunts me, a chilling reminder of how close I came to something I still don't fully understand. Some monsters don't hide in the shadows. They sit across the hall, smiling over a cup of coffee, waiting for the right moment to strike.
Hey everyone, thank you so much for supporting this channel. It truly means a lot. As a broke college student editing all my videos on an Android phone, it takes a lot of effort to bring these stories to life. A laptop would help me create better content faster, so if you enjoy my work, please subscribe and share. Your support makes all the difference. Thank you so much.